So there's this major news study out on medicinal cannabis that seems to deliver a really simple verdict. But when you dig in, it actually reveals this much, much deeper story about our entire mental health care system and what it really means for a treatment to work. Let's get into it.
It all kicks off with this headline, which is, about as blunt as you can get. This huge analysis published in the Lancet seems to drop a final definitive verdict on something millions of people are using for their mental health. And right away, you have to ask some pretty big questions.
And look, we need to be really clear here. This is not some small, one-off study. We're talking about a massive meta-analysis of 54 different trials stretching back almost half a century. So this carries some serious scientific weight. You can't just brush its conclusions aside. The central finding is pretty solid.
And that brings us to the real puzzle, right? This is the core tension of this whole story. If the biggest, most comprehensive clinical review we have says this stuff doesn't work for these conditions, then why are so many people using it? Are they all just wrong? Or is there something that the data just isn't seeing?
The numbers here are kind of staggering. A whopping 27% of people in the US and Canada say they use cannabis for medical reasons. And get this, about half of them, we're talking tens of millions of people, are using it specifically for mental health. This is not some niche thing. It's a huge mainstream trend that seems to fly directly in the face of the clinical evidence.
Okay, so this slide gets right to the heart of the paradox. A clinical trial, right, it measures success by seeing if a drug can move a score on a standardized survey, like the GAD-7 for anxiety. And this study found cannabis didn't really do that. But a patient defines success completely differently. They're not trying to change a score on a clipboard. They're just trying to stop a panic attack or get to sleep tonight or just make it through a really rough evening. And those two things can be true at the same time. A treatment can fail a clinical endpoint, but still feel like a lifeline to the person using it.
The researchers, though, they have a really serious concern. The lead author basically warns that by using cannabis, people might be putting off treatments that are actually proven to work. It's that classic opportunity cost argument. Every day you spend on something that doesn't work is a day you're not spending on something that does. And, that sounds like a very fair point.
But that warning, it kind of forces us to ask a really important follow-up question. When we talk about these more effective treatments, what exactly are we comparing cannabis to? Let's take a look at what we call the gold standards.
And this is where it gets so interesting. When you actually look at the data for the best-in-class SSRIs, the most common antidepressants, they show a small but statistically significant effect over a placebo. It's not this night and day difference. It's a pretty thin margin. So the argument to switch isn't as simple as going from something that doesn't work to something that's highly effective. The reality is a whole lot murkier.
So, the preference for SSRIs in the medical world, well, maybe it's less about a huge difference in how well they work and more about what this slide gets at. They are a known quantity versus an unknown one. We have decades of safety data on these drugs. We understand their risk profile. With cannabis, there's still a lot of question marks. So the argument becomes more about certainty and safety, not just pure effectiveness.
This whole debate about different treatments, it's all happening inside a much larger and honestly, pretty broken system. Because beyond the pills, the entire structure of mental health care is built on what some people call the bootstrapping problem. An illness like depression, it attacks your ability to plan, to organize, to act. But the system that's supposed to help you, it demands you do all of those things just to get in the door.
Just think about the standard advice we give. Go to the doctor, find a therapist, get some social services. Each of those steps sounds so simple on paper, but for someone in the middle of a major depressive episode, they are monumental tasks. Making a phone call, getting yourself to an appointment, filling out complicated forms, these things require the very energy and willpower that the illness has completely stolen from you.
And that leads to this incredibly cruel and fundamental paradox of mental health care. The system is designed in a way that the person who needs it the most is the person least capable of actually using it. It asks you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps right after the illness has taken away your boots.
So where does that leave us? If the approved drugs only offer a modest benefit and the system itself has this massive barrier to entry, what actually works? Let's focus on that because there are some really clear answers here.
The evidence for these things is just overwhelming. Restorative sleep might be the single most powerful factor there is. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, has an incredibly strong track record. And active social support and systemic aid, like helping someone manage their finances when they're overwhelmed, that can break the cycle.
These are the things that really truly work.
So why isn't everyone just doing these things? Well, here's the catch. Look at this table. The very things that work best are often the hardest to get. Doctors are often afraid to prescribe effective sleep aids because of dependency risks. Good therapy is incredibly expensive, and public wait times can be months or even years long. And getting financial or social aid, it means you have to navigate a soul-crushing bureaucracy precisely when you're at your absolute worst.
And this brings us right back to the beginning. That study finding, the one that said cannabis isn't clinically effective, that's not really the headline. The real story is that people are turning to it because the things that we know work are underfunded, gate-kept, and for many people, basically unavailable. That null result in the Lancet, it's a symptom of a much, much larger failure of our entire system.
So this is really the thought we should end with. The debate can't just be about which pill is better than another. The real question we need to be asking is this. What would a mental health care system that actually works for the people who need it, what would that even look like? A system that doesn't just offer prescriptions, but actively delivers the sleep, the therapy, and the support that we know lead to recovery. What would it take for us to build that?